Hey Wastelanders, Ryan from WGNR here with another terrain talk, and this time we're looking at how I built this modular bunker used in the From the Past scenario for Fallout Wasteland Warfare by Modiphius. This project was used as the Site Q bunker in the first scenario of a 3-part campaign, so make sure you click the link above here and check out that battle report to see this bunker in action. This was my first build incorporating electronics, and I'm pretty proud to say it even gained some attention from the crew over at Modiphius as part of their Fallout Friday social media campaign. Now, I'm no pro, but there's lots of great tutorial channels out there if you're into terrain building like I am. I definitely suggest you check out some channels like Mel the Terrain Tutor, Wylock's Armory, and Eric's Hobby Workshop for some more inspiration. Now, I'm nowhere near up to their level, but I love hobbying, so if you're watching this, hopefully you can gain some tips or ideas for some scratch build projects of your own. But enough with that chit-chat, let's get on with the build. I like to recycle materials whenever possible when working on terrain, and for this project I used a couple odds and ends, including an old margarine container. It should go without saying that this was empty when I started the project. An old broken Bluetooth speaker that I got out of a case of beer. Take a guess at which brand. A cordless phone I found in the trash. Some electric tea lights. And some foam board that I used as the base of this building. I used a few other bits and bobs, and I'll go over those along the way, but this junk was what made up the bulk of the building. Now, first off, I primed the margarine tub with gray Krylon rattle can paint and primer. I want this thing to be as functional as possible, so I'll cut a door out using some shears. I used some hot glue to attach this metal plate from the dollar store that I got to the inside of the margarine tub so I can make some modular accessories to add to the roof later. I ended up cutting out the roof and putting the plate on the top instead, but I'll go over why exactly I did that in a minute here. But after taking apart the phone and the speaker, I had this little metal grating thing that looked a bit like a satellite dish, so bingo, I decided to build a satellite dish. I hot glued the grate onto a bottle cap and then attached that unit to a lid of a vape juice container. I've just recently quit smoking and vaping, so why not turn those nicotine products into something useful, right? I added a magnet to the bottom and voila, one spinning magnetic radar dish. Now, the magnet wasn't quite powerful enough to stick to the plate through the plastic container, so that's why I removed the plate from the bottom and put it on the top instead. Now, this is probably where I should have cut the roof off the building so it could be much more functional, but honestly, I just completely forgot what I was doing in the heat of the moment. I did end up cutting off the roof, but it was much harder down the road, and you'll probably see what I mean when I get there. I did cut out the door for the building and decided to add this little metal entryway using some corrugated cardboard. I glued the walls of the shack to the container, but I left the roof separate so I could remove minis in and out of the structure as needed. I also glued some parts from the cordless phone, like the chargeable battery and the menu button, to the outside of the building to add some details and distract from the fact that this building was once a tub of buttery goodness. Electronics and bits always make for good details on projects, I find. I had lots of parts left over from the speaker, including a semi-transparent plastic dome with this red rubber thing on top of it, so I decided to turn this into a little nuclear reactor looking thing. So I took a plastic lid, cut a hole in the bottom, and I glued a tea light to the top of that lid, and voila, we've got one glowing nuclear reactor. Pretty cheap, pretty simple, gave it some primer, and away we go. I used an old honey swizzle from, Wood Dipping Honey to be used as the radar dish antenna, and already this thing is starting to take shape. Pretty cool already, looking a bit like an old pre-war industrial building that maybe had some post-war mods to it. But now for the fun stuff, paint. This will really start to tie things in the project together. I gave everything minus the metal magnetic plate a fairly liberal washing of very watered down cinnamon brown paint. I used this cool retro looking green for the main part of the building, and then I alternated red and blue for the corrugated metal shack, just to give it a bit of a different look. I masked off a strip along the midpoint of the building and decided to paint it orange to add a little bit of color and life to this project, but it ended up being a mess with a capital M. The stripe was crooked, the paint leaked through the mask, it was just bad. But I decided to use more bits to cover up my horrible paint job, including some of these rubber buttons from the cordless phone itself. So hey, use what you got, and bits and turf always work to cover up some mistakes. It wasn't perfect, but at least I covered up the crooked parts of my orange stripe enough to get me going. I cut out the roof by going along the edge of the metal plate and used a piece of cardboard to make a bit of a rim out of cereal box, so this magnetic rim wouldn't fall down. Again, I should have done all this from Jump Street, but hey, live and learn. I had some thick double-sided tape, which was pretty much the exact size of the stripe, which I painted along the side of the building, so I attached that and painted it orange as well, and it worked to cover up most of my screw-ups on this thing. I also added a bit of definition and texture to the building, so a bit of a happy accident there, the way it all sort of worked out. And now we've got something that's starting to look like something. At this stage, the bunker would probably be table ready, but it still looked a little shiny for the Fallout universe, so it was time to do some weathering. I took some more of that cinnamon brown, much more watered down this time around, and really applied it to the entirety of the structure. Every nook and cranny got washed with this thing, and I just love how grimy it starts to look. I've been wanting to use this AK Interactive enamel rust streaks that my amazing girlfriend had gotten me over the holiday season, and this was the perfect chance to try this stuff out. It takes a little while to dry, and I also use the AK Interactive white spirits to make the streaks even streakier, but this stuff was highly worth the wait and the time it took to get it applied. I knocked out a base using that foam board. I should have probably used MDF, but didn't have any on hand, so hey, use what you've got available. It warped a bit, but hey, that's life working with foam board. I should have added a little bit of paint or glue to the underside to, flatten that out and counteract the warping. And I'll get around to it one of these days, but hey, I'm lazy. Nobody's perfect. For the floor of the inside of the bunker, I used more cereal box with a metallic silver and used a hobby knife to score the lines into the floor to make it look sort of like metal sheeting. A fun little trick, and added a little bit of detail to the interior. I attached the bunker to the base with some hot glue, and then it was time to tackle these electronics. The little LEDs were the perfect size to build a mini cage light looking thing for the front of the metal shack. I raided my girlfriend's crafting supplies again for these. They run off a little watch battery, and you can get a big box of these in a bunch of different colors off Amazon for fairly cheap. I glued a piece of that foam core to the underside of the roof, which is actually going to serve two purposes. Number one, it will work to friction fit the roof into place to give that shack a little bit more rigidity and keep the roof from falling off, and it's going to hide the battery. A little bit of hot glue, keep that battery in place, and we're in good shape. I didn't glue the LED in place because I couldn't be bothered to hook up an on-off switch for this unit, despite a decent background in electronics, and maybe I'll get around to it one day, but I just figured sliding it on and off, just like this to turn it on, would probably get the job done. So when I want the light on, I put the light on. Done. To give the light a look of that sort of cage around it, I used just some very thin gauge wire and super glued it onto the LED. I applied a little bit of dried moss from the dollar store, some gravel, some kitty litter, in fact, and some flocking to the base, and I decided to call it a day. Again, I could have done way more on this piece, especially when the base is concerned, but I'm no perfectionist. Besides, it's the Wasteland. It ain't supposed to be pretty. That's about it, folks, how I built the Site Q bunker. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you're enjoying this series of videos. And if it gave you some ideas on some terrain builds of your own, I hope that helps. But until next time, grab those brushes and get crafting.